Hello, millionaires. This is TwannaYvette on Demand. I am TwannaYvette, and I am here with the latest update on the Tim Norman case. So, Sweetie Pie's reality TV star appeals his murder for hire conviction to the Eighth Circuit. James Timothy Norman's lawyer argued that the trial court erred in allowing hearsay text messages and testimony as evidence. If you guys don't remember, a few years back, we were covering the Tim Normans of Sweetie Pies. For 2 years, we did this, and so 3 years ago, we started this, and here we are in 2024. We thought it was over because he was deemed guilty by the courts, and here we are back live and in action with more news. The St. Louisian says the son of a reality TV star convicted in the 2016 murder for hire plot appealed his two life sentences before a three-judge panel at the Eighth Circuit on Wednesday. James Timothy Norman was convicted in September 2022 for orchestrating the shooting, unaliving of his 20-year-old nephew, Andre Montgomery Jr., in March 2016. Norman was found guilty of conspiracy to commit unaliving for hire, and conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud. Norman, who is 44 years old, is the son of Robbie Montgomery, the star of Welcome to Sweetie Pies, a reality show that chronicled her family's management of their popular business. Various family members, including Norman, would appear frequently while the show aired on the Oprah Winfrey Network from 2011 to 2018. Norman's attorney, Jennifer Bongine of Bongine Law Group, told the three-judge panel that the heart of the argument against him was based on hearsay text messages from Andre Montgomery to his grandmother that were sent 9 months before the shooting. Andre Montgomery had been suspected. He was suspected but not convicted. Okay, he was suspected of stealing property allegedly from his grandmother's home and sent texts about the burglary that referred to Norman. Perhaps if Mr. Montgomery was in fact shot, assaulted, kidnapped, and other type of crimes that occurred with or in close proximity to the making of the statements, then the government might be on good footing with their argument, Bonjean said. So the judge, um, which was Dwayne Benton, a George W. Bush appointee, questioned Bonjean about whether the text messages shed light on the unlikely event that Andre Montgomery had um, consented to a life insurance policy. They wanted to know if he actually gave his consent and signed the life insurance policy against him, naming Norman as a beneficiary. So prosecutors argued that the $450,000 policy, which they contend Andre Montgomery did not know about, served as motive for Norman. I think it requires so much speculation because it is clear from the hearsay statement and in the context that they were made, that it really relates to him not wanting to answer questions or being fearful of answering questions around the burglary that he was suspected of committing at his grandmother's home, Bonjean said. That is the context of the statement. So Assistant U.S. Attorney Angie Dennis pushed back on the importance of the text messages in the larger context of the case. And you remember us talking about Angie Dennis and her stance in that particular case. And she was really pushing because this was clear information on where Andre stood, um, regardless of if Miss Robbie believed it or not. This was his stance on it. And remember, when I spoke to Andre's sister over on Facebook, do you guys remember that she allegedly said that if anything happened to Andre, he said to look at Tim Norman. So all eyes were on Tim. Everything pointed to Tim. Well, it was said that they were admitted one day one of the trial, they constituted 25 lines of testimony, Dennis argued. They were not referred against until two lines with transcripts in closing. Remember, we looked at those transcripts a few years back. This was in the face of overwhelming um, independence evidence that Mr. Norman had people looking for Andre Montgomery. Now, remember, um, and this was maybe last year, they uncovered that the alleged shooter in the case that Tim Norman had allegedly hired made a fake account on Instagram so that he and Tim could follow Andre on his whereabouts and what he was doing on that particular social media outlet. Okay. So Bonjean countered that even a small amount of evidence can be the difference between guilty or innocent, right? So, 25 lines can be pretty damning in the context of a trial, Bonjean said. It's not the quantity, it's the quality. And these are quality statements. A jury is going to be incredibly impacted by statements from somebody against from the grave saying, Tim is out to get me. Tim is having people looking for me. And the fact that they did go back to it in closing arguments to say, and he was right. Sometimes the most powerful evidence takes very few words. So Bonjean also argued that the trial court erred in admitting hearsay testimony from Travell Hill, who was the alleged shooter, who said that an associate of the family named Christopher Carroll was also part of the conspiracy, which we didn't have a lot of evidence on. We didn't see that particular name in any of the court documents, but Travell allegedly said an associate of the family named Christopher Carroll was also a part of the conspiracy. He was not jailed or anything. He wasn't even in the courtroom, didn't even, get on stand. So why Travell thought that was important is quite beyond me because he wasn't a part of any of this. Well, anyway, Hill pleaded guilty in June of 2022 to one count of conspiracy to commit murder for hire and one count of, unalive for hire in the unaliving of Andre Montgomery Jr. So, according to his plea deal, Hill admitted meeting with Norman on the day of the unaliving and understanding that Norman wanted Montgomery unalived. So, Hill then used a .380 caliber hand weapon to fatally shoot Montgomery, right? Hill disposed of the utensil of the weapon, and his phone also was disposed of and was paid $5,000 2 days later. The payment allegedly came from Tim Norman. Hill testified at Norman's trial before jurors convicted Norman. There was no independent evidence that Mr. Carroll was part of any conspiracy other than a mere association, which really was not in dispute because they knew each other and Mr. Carroll worked for Mr. Norman and his family, Bonjean said. So you see what I'm talking about? That right there, we didn't even cover because they didn't think it was important, so his name never came up. Anyway, she added that the lack of direct evidence was problematic for the prosecution since evidence linking Carroll to the conspiracy is the most direct evidence of Norman's intent to unalive his nephew. So, this testimony that Mr. Hill had provided is not trustworthy, Bonjean said. If you look at the estimates that Mr. Carroll made to the FBI during two lengthy interviews previously, he has consistently said that I had no idea about this. I was not involved with it. I never made these statements to Mr. Hill. Well, Carroll invoked his Fifth Amendment right to avoid testimony during the trial. So Dennis argued that Norman, through his testimony, confirmed a conversation he had with Hill in which he specifically asked if Hill had talked to Carroll. So after the meeting, immediately after Mr. Hill goes to purchase the firearm, and it is his intent to go seek out and unalive Andre Montgomery, Dennis said. That is the independent evidence of Carroll's participation in the conspiracy. Well, Dennis added that text messages between Norman and the other participants were further proof of Carol's involvement with the crime. So we may be entering a whole nother dilemma with this, you guys. It was said that we must establish Mr. Carroll's participation beyond the preponderance of the evidence, right? That's what Dan has told the court. That is the standard we're talking about here. And this is all evident that was before the court when they deemed that Mr. Carroll had participated in the conspiracy and that those statements were admissible. So judges Ralph R. Eckerson and Jonathan A. Cobes, both Donald Trump appointees, rounded out the three-judge panel, which took the arguments under advisement. There is no time rule for a decision. Now, this is what I'm talking about here. This is what I'm talking about here. We're looking at this, and we heard all the evidence, and we saw all the court documents, right? And it just goes without saying that this was one of the clear-cut cases that Tim Norman should have been, prosecuted and jailed. And I think that it was fair for him to get a life sentence, no less than 99 years for the unaliving of his nephew. That's just my opinion. I wasn't there in person. I don't know. I was, able to get in on the Zoom. I did get the documents that were shown, and those videos are still up if you need to go back and see all of those documents and see, who, what, when, where, and why. And they're all labeled. And I will also put this video in the playlist so you guys can go back and see what we talked about. There was no mention of a Mr. Carroll. So now enters this, Mr. Carroll in the story, and we're talking about someone else that Travell obviously he believes he spoke to get the firearm to unalive Andre Montgomery. So the only reason that this Mr. Carroll would be entered into another trial or um, this particular season of this whole thing would be to ask his part in it, and if he spoke to Travell. Him knowing the participants is not enough to reopen this or even consider this as an appeal. But Tim is appealing. He has his attorneys on the case. He wants out of jail or to at least get a retrial. He obviously doesn't want to be locked up anymore. He is standing on his innocence. He is standing on the fact that he didn't know any of this was happening, which I clearly don't believe, which is why I started looking at this case in the beginning. I mean, with all of the evidence that we saw, it was just an open and shut case, in my opinion. I strongly believe that Tim Norman put all of this in motion. I believe that he hired these people. I believe that he hired the young lady, and the young lady got more than Travell, but he hired the young lady to lure Andre out of the studio that night. But I don't believe for 1 minute that these people just did this on their own. And I certainly don't believe that this secret person named Mr. Carroll had a big part to play in any of this. Nobody in this whole gamut, understand me, got enough money. They were not paid enough to take a life. Their part in this was so huge, yet their payment was so minuscule. It just makes me wonder, you know, what was your reasoning for wanting only $5,000? The girl, she got only $10,000 or so. What was your, what were you trying to buy? What were you trying to do, with such a small amount of the money? And you knew what was going to happen. Now, the girl says that she didn't know what was going to happen, right? She said that, she just thought when Tim said, he was, gonna get his boys to get up on Andre, that they were just gonna beat him up because Andre was the one that said, "Hey, Tim had, my grandmother robbed." I don't believe that for a second. I think that Andre was telling the truth, and I believe that that Tim did this. He set everything in motion. He hired these people because these people would not just do this on their own. Nobody else has any reason, if you will, for this to have been, you know, their positioning. Who had something against Andre, other than Tim Norman and wanting money and wanting to be the heir of the throne in Miss Robbie's demise. And let us not forget that there was $1 million policy that Tim had in his possession against Miss Robbie. So I still stand my position on this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you so much. I hope this update gave you some insight on what's happening now. I'm still following the case, and as more information arises, I will keep you guys informed. Thank you so much. And do let me know what you guys think in the comments. Love and peace, and I'll talk to you in the next one.